Day IPAA Victoria event. It's my great pleasure to be welcoming you here. We're here live at Ridges in Melbourne CBD, and we're joined by a fantastic panel who'll be joining us shortly. Let me recognise that IPAA Victoria first hosted its first International Women's Day event in 2008, and typically this has been an event which gathers 1,200 people together face-to-face in a room, usually in the safe hands of Virginia Trioli. And we're really sorry that we aren't able to do that, of course, this year, but we have got a fantastic panel of speakers with us for this session, and once again in the hands of Virginia, who will be leading us through that panel discussion soon. But thank you to all of you who've generously agreed to join us for tonight's event. Let me say at the outset that in just a moment I'll exit stage right, and then you'll be hearing from women leaders from now until the duration of the event. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathering. In my case, that's the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also recognise any other elders that may be joining us this evening. I'd like to thank also my colleagues on the IPAA Victoria board and the IPAA Victoria team who've put so much work into this event this year as every other year, and my colleagues also on the Victorian Secretaries Board who are joining us online this evening. Let me also welcome colleagues in Victorian government departments, in local government councils, in the federal public service, and of course all of our partners and allied partners in the public purpose sector who do so much work, including in the private and not-for-profit sectors. I also want to thank tonight's event partners, and I think you'll all know that this year more than ever, they are so important to our success. Let me thank Fisher Leadership for helping us celebrate women this evening, KPMG and Maddox for their important role. Our ability to hold this event and others throughout the year relies heavily on the support we receive from these important partners. As the professional association for all of us who work in and with the public purpose sector, IPAA Victoria has the unique ability to bring together all levels of government and relevant sectors of tertiary education, not-for-profit organisations, business and the community sector to present events such as these. And never before has it been so important for us to remain up to date and stay connected as a sector, to equip ourselves and our organisations with the skills and the confidence that we need to tackle the challenges ahead and to have the support of a strong professional network. We know you need to be ready for the future, and that's what the events that we hold are all about. We have a wealth of accessible online career development options, connections to peers and senior leaders across Victoria, and member-only access, of course, to resources which is tailored to support you and your organisation and your team to succeed. Personal membership with IPAA Victoria provides flexible and contemporary career development for every stage of your professional journey. And tonight, we have a very special membership offer for you. There are 50 personal memberships available for just $50 each. To take advantage of this special offer, you can visit the IPAA website, and the website details should be on your screen now. Well, let me move most importantly to the acknowledgement of country. And Auntie Georgina Nicholson was to be with us tonight to give us the welcome to country. However, she is unfortunately unwell and could not join us. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Jill Gallagher, AO, who has kindly offered to give us her acknowledgement of country. Please join me in welcoming Jill. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I was very honoured at the last minute to ask to do the acknowledgement of country. Auntie Georgina is a very good friend of mine, and we've been friends for many years, and I wish her well. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land from all over the state of Victoria. Lands that were never ceded by us as Aboriginal people. Our people walked these lands for thousands of generations. We had our own structures, our own laws, our own political structures. We had our own doctors. We had our own epidemiologists. And we cared for country for thousands and thousands of generations. I'm currently on Wurundjeri land, and I'd like to pay my respects to all elders, past and present. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Jill, for your generous and moving welcome. I'd now like to welcome Ensar Hamid, our Deputy President. Ensar is the General Manager, Government and Stakeholder Engagement and Registry Services at the Victorian Land Registry Services. But just before I hand over to Ensar, I also wanted to recognise the contribution of the incredible President that preceded me, Kim Peake, and also David Ali, who many of you will know as our CEO, has recently finished up with IPAA Victoria after making such a significant contribution for a number of years. So let me pass on my thanks and acknowledgement of those two for their contribution, and now invite our Deputy President, Ensar Hamid, to speak to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening to celebrate exceptional female leadership. Over the years, IPAA Victoria has had the privilege of hosting some incredible, influential, and inspiring women to speak at the IWD celebration. For those of you who know me, you know that I get my advice from a brutally honest and trusted advisor, my 6-year-old daughter, Nia. And when I asked her how she would honor women for International Women's Day, she said, "It's very simple, Mum. Get up there, tell them that back in the olden days, women couldn't do the things they wanted, couldn't work, and couldn't make any money. And now they can do whatever they want and earn tons of cash." I couldn't bring myself to burst her bubble. I couldn't bring myself to tell her that in 2005, in my first role, that I was rocking a baby bump, and that was the subject of quite a lot of conversation at the professional services firm that I worked in Washington, D.C. And after a time, and even more conversation, the baby bump was seen as not being part of the aesthetic or the cultural fit. And I moved on and left that role and went on to another one. I couldn't bear to tell her that in the US, the maternity leave timeline is 6 weeks, sometimes 2, depending on where you're employed. And I really didn't want to tell her that even today at the Victorian Land Registry Services, I work with incredible women who were around when you had to decide if you would resign from your public service role to get married and to have children, and that either you made the choice to do one or the other, or you lied to the government about the choices that you were making. And so instead, I've said to her that we will thank women. We will say thank you to all of the first women, to the only women, to the second women, to the third women who have preceded us and made these opportunities available to me and to her. And we'll continue to thank all of the incredible women who will keep paving the way, because the World Economic Forum forecasts something like 200 years before gender equity is truly achieved on the global stage. IPAA Victoria has framed tonight's International Women's Day celebration around the contribution of incredible female leaders across the public purpose sector who have played a significant role during the pandemic, which has been one of the most challenging years since the World War. The women on the panel tonight have played absolutely pivotal roles and demonstrated exceptional leadership during COVID-19. Tonight's guest speakers are Nicole Bartholomew, Chief Executive Officer, CoHealth, Jill Gallagher AO, who gave us that incredible acknowledgement and is the Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation. Kate Matson, Deputy Secretary, Engagement and Delivery, COVID-19 Public Health, Department of Human Services, and Vivian Nguyen, Chairperson, Victorian Multicultural Commission. I'm very pleased to welcome back Virginia Trioli, who needs no introduction, given she has such a familiar voice to all of us and for many years. Virginia is one of Australia's best-known journalists. She has a formidable reputation as a television anchor, a radio presenter, a writer, and a commentator. Virginia currently anchors mornings on ABC Radio Melbourne, and she's a 2-time winner of the prestigious Walkley Award. Tonight we welcome Nicole Bartholomew. Nicole has been the Chief Executive Officer of CoHealth since 2019, having served in a range of senior leadership roles in community health since 2006. CoHealth is a leading Victorian community health service providing healthcare to vulnerable communities, including those from refugee backgrounds, people experiencing homelessness, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Victorians, and people impacted by intergenerational poverty and trauma. Nicole is deeply committed to providing high-quality health care to people who may otherwise miss out, and is also passionate about addressing the social determinants of poor health, such as poverty, housing, and education. It's a big job. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Jill Gallagher-Ayo. Jill is the Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation. Prior to this, she was the Victorian Treaty Advancement Commissioner. She has spent the past 20 years advancing Aboriginal health and well-being, and was awarded an Order of Australia in 2013 for her work. She's on the Victorian Honour Roll for Women and the Victorian Aboriginal Honour Roll, and was named one of IPAA Victoria's top 50 public sector women in 2019. Thank you, Jill, for joining us tonight. I'm pleased to welcome Kate Matson, Deputy Secretary, Engagement and Delivery in the COVID-19 Public Health Team at the Department of Health. In this role, Kate leads Victoria's COVID-19 testing and pathology system, community engagement, public and major events, and compliance and enforcement activities. Kate joined the COVID response in July 2020 from the Department of Transport. Welcome to you, Kate. And our final panelist, but not least, is Vivian Nguyen. Viv is chairperson at the Victorian Multicultural Commission. For more than 25 years, Viv has worked as a business executive and a community leader in corporate, community, and government settings, and agencies applying her business knowledge, leadership, and technical expertise to help organizations with funding, governance, risk management, stakeholder relationships, and to advance their social objectives. Thank you for joining us tonight, Viv. Before I hand over to Virginia, I just want to remind you all that we're using Slido this evening. As with most interactive IPAA Victoria events, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions to the panel through the online tool. The Slido panel is visible as part of your online viewing screen for this evening's event. Type your questions at any time and vote on other people's questions by clicking on the thumbs up button next to the individual questions. The most popular questions will rise to the top, and I'm sure Virginia will do her best to try and get through as many of them as possible in the time we've got. So I'll now hand over to you, Virginia, for what I know will be a great discussion.
Thanks very much, and good evening, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. I'm only sad that we couldn't all be together in that terrific room as we were last year and the year before and the one before that, which I always remember as just being such an inspiring gathering of people who work in the public sector, including me. And it was always particularly gratifying to look out over that huge room filled with close to 2,000 people, and to see so many women, as we know, in the public sector in particular, and the not-for-profits, their presence and their employment levels are very high, and it was great to see that. So I know you're all out there streaming us, or at least I hope you are. I think it's cocktail o'clock somewhere out there, so you can pour yourself a glass of something. After a week like this and a couple of weeks like this, you probably need one. And settle in for what I hope will be a really great conversation. Our wonderful panellists have already been introduced to you. And I've got an informal title, if you like, for the conversation this year, which was, so, how was your year? Because, you don't all answer at once. Because we're reflecting on the challenges, on what our panellists' responsibilities were during the pandemic, how those responsibilities shifted and changed, the lessons learned, the things they did well, the things that they regret, the things they do differently. And I thought we all think this would be a great topic of conversation, because that's exactly where we all are right now. We're not through this thing. In fact, I read a really great piece in Time magazine the other day that said we're at the 3/4 mark at the pandemic. The 3/4 mark. Which of course, which means we're in the grand final winning quarter, right? It's always one in the last quarter. So I'm trying to put it as optimistically as I can. And with the vaccine now arriving, I guess we are. But we're not completely through it. And of course, also our leading health professionals around the world keep telling us that this is not the last pandemic that we're going to have to go through. So a conversation like this is going to be, I think, very restoring for our sense of pride and optimism in what we do and what we have done, but also lays the foundation for how we can do this perhaps even better if the inevitable happens and another one rolls around again. So at 3/4 mark, how was your year? And Nicole, I'll start with you. Reflections from you on 2020. What you did, what your responsibilities were, and how it went.
Thanks, Virginia, and thanks for the invitation to be here this evening. It's great to be with such a panel like this, and I want to acknowledge the achievement of my other panellists. How do I describe the year? It was hard, extraordinary, and surprisingly rewarding. I was 5 months into my first job as a CEO, and what an incredible induction, I suppose, into leading an organisation. I still remember that very first day in February, standing in the office in Footscray, speaking to 2 colleagues and saying, what kind of shape is our pandemic preparedness plan in? And do we have enough laptops for people to work from home? I distinctly remember that conversation. And of course, knowing what we know now, how things moved over that 12 months was extraordinary. I think of CoHealth's experience over that past 12 months in a couple of different phases, really. The backstage phase, so how do we continue to deliver the critical services that we deliver to vulnerable communities? Around 50,000 people a year use our services. How do we do that safely? How do we stay engaged and connected with those people? How do I keep close to 1,000 people safe while they're delivering services? How do I keep them connected to an organisation? And then the front stage work, all of that service delivery and all of the work that we were about to step into in terms of being part of the Victorian system for responding to the pandemic, testing clinics, towers in lockdown, responding to high rises, and now, about to roll out a vaccine. So, hard, extraordinary, but incredibly proud of the way the organisation worked and responded and kept people safe and kept people connected.
Jill, how was your year?
Wow. Okay, where do I start? It was hard and it was very heavy in various stages of last year. And I also, there was some inspirational moments that you glimpse in the height of the fear of the pandemic and in the height of the lockdowns that we had to endure here in Victoria, in particular in Melbourne. I glimpsed innovation and hope from communities, and in particular the Victorian Aboriginal community. In early 2020, as we all know, a lot of the Gippsland area and I think in Wangaratta area, there was really severe bushfires. So VATCO is a peak body for Aboriginal health and wellbeing in the state of Victoria. We've got 32 Aboriginal organisations who are members of VATCO, and they provide clinics to the Aboriginal, their own local Aboriginal communities. They provide the social determinants of health. So our members in the Gippsland areas are already exhausted by the time we realise that this is a world pandemic and we're in trouble here. But what I saw was coming together as a collective and working out how do we keep our communities safe? How do we do that when we know as Aboriginal people culture and ceremony and staying connected is so important? And that's for everyone, whether you're Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, in my opinion. But ceremony for us was so vital to maintain that, and we couldn't. So we had pockets of our communities already exhausted from the bushfires and then having to spark up and keep our people safe from the pandemic. But the other thing I witnessed was that government didn't see us as an afterthought. When I say us, I'm talking Aboriginal communities here. They invited us into the table very early to talk about how we're going to keep our communities safe. sometimes, and no disrespect to governments, but sometimes government messaging can get lost and it can be a little bit boring.
You can speak frankly here.
I
You're among
can
friends.
speak frankly?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So what we did, we mobilised our members to mobilise their communities and just refocus the messaging in a more culturally appropriate way. And, you know, when you look at, there was COVID in the Victorian Aboriginal community, but not a lot. And we've had no deaths from COVID. And I think that's down to the work that the Aboriginal organisations did. And a lot of them have now also put up their hands to administer the vaccine, which is really good because they know the importance of, you know, we're not there yet. And this is just the next stage. So I saw some inspirational work where elders who live in their own homes on their own, and we repurposed. One of our biggest services here in Melbourne also has shares in a restaurant. And so they repurposed all the food and delivered packages to Aboriginal elders who lived on their own because all those services stopped. And you had to have, you know, making sure you're doing welfare checks. And I just saw hope and inspiration and, but it was tough, Virginia.
Well, absolutely, and for everyone. But that agility that you describe at the end there is terrific, and it'll be a key part of our conversation today, of course. Vivian, a lot of work for an organisation like yours.
Thank you. It is. It has been. And I just want to pay my respects to Auntie Jill for joining us tonight. Your predecessor called us a little outfit. What is the VMC? What does it do for half of the population of Victoria being from a culturally diverse background? 2019 was a really difficult year for the Commission, but for me in particular, like you, Nicole, I came in August 19 with a view to doing a lot of the strengthening side of the multicultural community through celebrations and things of that nature. And we really quickly had to pivot to literally advocacy. We talked to the communities, we agitated the likes of Kate and her colleagues and every other person in the world of Victorian government about what about this, what about that. I hosted, just the ones that I chaired and co-chaired, at least 100 sessions, and that's just the ones I chaired and co-chaired, not the ones that I attended. And there was just so much. We really felt that we needed to bring the community's voice to the table so the decision makers of the Victorian government could hear from and respond accordingly. Unlike you, Auntie Gio, I don't think the Victorian multicultural communities were part of the discussion at the outset. I think we felt more like an afterthought. And I wish there were more actions that were taken in March rather than in July. But out of that, we saw a lot of resilience in the community when the policies weren't out for ready for migrants, for international students. So much emergency food relief were delivered by the communities themselves. And I'm grateful that Minister Spence, the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, set up the Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Task Force. And I'm grateful that Minister Wynne set up the working group for the housing lockdowns that gave us some sort of a structure, if you like, to support and elevate the issues and to the decision makers. And I'm really also grateful that the amount of collaboration, like as frustrating as it was, there was just a lot of collaboration within the departments. And I think that was what really helped expedite the issues that we saw earlier in March and then have them dealt with in a much more timely manner. Tough year, but really, really good year.
Well, Kate, you and your colleagues in the Department of Health were right in the hot seat, so I feel like I almost need to break that question, how was your year, down into about 7 parts, but kick it off for us at least.
Well, I guess my year was surprising because, as mentioned before, I didn't start the year in the Department of Health.
That's
and I
right.
think 12 months ago, if you'd said to me I'd be responding to a pandemic as a member of the Department of Health, I probably would have laughed at you. So I was working with my colleagues at the Department of Transport as other states were closing borders to Victoria and taking away the public transport services, but still trying to keep people moving. And then my boss, Jerome Weimar, got a call in July, and he called me on a Sunday night and said, "Will you come with me?" And in some respects, it felt like he was asking me to jump off a cliff. We'd all seen COVID, we'd all lived it, we'd lived through wave one, we were, on our way up, sadly, in wave two. So 2020 for me personally, extremely surprising. Yes, tiring, yes, hard, but it is going to be, quite frankly, the most important and most rewarding job that I ever do in my life, and my professional colleagues at the Department of Health all seem to feel the same way. So I think, the Department of Health over the last few months, and yes, there's been, we done some things differently, I'm sure, but there was no rule book for this. Unfortunately, the Spanish flu didn't leave this wonderful little guide for us to say, do this, do this, do this. Life has changed, global travel has changed, the way we do business has changed, and to Nicole's point before, I think we're all surprised that we're able to adapt and be so agile to all work from home and sit with our yoga pants down at the bottom and the nice blouse at the top and manage that we're able to be really effective in that way. So for me, last year was a surprise. Hard, but extremely rewarding, and I'm still learning even today.
Nicole, you touched on this just in your opening comments there about the key question, what does our, pandemic plan look like? So I want to pick up from that. How prepared were you? How prepared was your organisation for something like this? Vivian?
Well, we are a very small outfit, Virginia. We follow.
He's not here anymore, so we can put that to one side.
Our administrative rules follow that of the Department of Premier and Cabinet. So whatever it was that was there or wasn't there, we didn't have them either. So our team literally had to pivot to organising events, physical events, to actually advocating, writing submissions, writing policies, making sure that we are organising gatherings for the online meetings for the community, taking those, handing them, palming them off and making sure that their issues are dealt with and dealt with timely, where they are specific issues, where they are systemic issues that we could really bring them on and hand them over to the right teams within the Victorian government.
What was the answer to your question, Nicole? Did you have everything you needed?
We did have a pandemic plan. So
You didn't?
We did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
We did. We had the plan that had been prepared for, swine flu that, never actually became a pandemic. So that we had that and we started with that. We, I suppose, in some ways were fortunate as an organisation. Prior to the pandemic, we'd spent 18 months as an organisation transforming the way we work, the way we do things, really trying to build an organisation that was agile, responsive and sustainable, because as a not-for-profit health organisation, the environment we work in is constantly changing, uncertain and challenging. And so the board really saw that, as an organisation, we need to be agile and responsive to this constant change. And that work really underpinned our ability to be agile in this environment. We were able to pivot very, very quickly. Staff, showed great strength and resilience during that time. And I think, that work that we had done really paid off.
Jill, was your organisation ready? Did you have a plan?
We didn't have a plan as such. We're a little bit different to co-health, as in as VACCHO does not deliver health services.
Yeah.
But what we had to do was to ensure that our members out there, who are sprinkled throughout Victoria, are ready, that they do have pandemic plans, that their clinics are geared up and they're getting the messaging from governments.
And they would, in the early days, they wouldn't have been.
No.
You wouldn't have had any of that.
No, exactly right. Coming out of the bushfires, a lot of our members in Gippsland area had disaster plans, but a disaster plan is not the same as a pandemic plan.
That's right.
Even access to PPE, Face masks were running out, and I had one of our biggest services in the north, who's run by a well-respected Aboriginal leader. Her name's Felicia Dean. Aboriginal woman, very strong and staunch. She said, Jill, we're going to have to close shop if we don't get face masks. We need some face masks, otherwise our people aren't going to access services. So we had to do some quick negotiations with the state government and say, we need some face masks urgently for the clinic. And they provided that. So it's about understanding what our members' needs were and how can we influence government to get that.
It's interesting to draw that contrast that you pointed out, Vivian, about the lines of communication that we're hearing here, but that you felt were missing for your organisation into government.
Yes, I think an issue was because there wasn't clear structure within the department. So one of the things that the minister, one of the ministers at the public housing estate when she was there asked me was, what was the one thing I would like to see? And I said, I'd like to see multicultural affairs being embedded in the Victorian government departments, just like the Aboriginal affairs portfolio is. Yeah. There isn't there. So you've got a multicultural affairs portfolio that sits here, and then it kind of links out to the other departments. And when something like this happened, it happened so fast. A centralising sort of situation like that isn't really adaptive to responding to quick changes.
And do you think as a result of last year and everything that's happened, have you achieved that change with the department or not?
I think I'm still a long way from that. Right. To get to where Auntie Joy is, we've got a long way from that.
We're going to leave you two to chat afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, you need to add some advice on here on how to do it. The big question about preparedness, were you prepared? Was there a plan when it comes to the Department of Health? I think history has shown that there were some very, very big gaps and some big black holes in terms of our preparedness and our planning in health. Is that fair?
I can't really speak to too much before July, given, of course, that was before I joined the department. But the department was looking, obviously, at what was going on overseas. We were preparing our health services. Did we have enough ICU beds? Did we have enough ventilators? Because we were preparing for what we thought would be our experience based on what we were seeing overseas in Italy at the time and the UK and so on. And it's due to both the public service, obviously government and Victorians themselves, that thank God we never got there. So there were plans and we were absolutely preparing. But did we have a testing system for everyone to access at the time? No, we didn't. Did it take time to set it up? Yes, it did. We've got a very devolved pathology model. We've worked really closely with our public labs and our private labs to boost up that capacity. And I'm really pleased and proud that every single time we stumbled, it was very much a continuous improvement mindset. You know, the culture at Health over the past 12 months has been, okay, how can we make that better? How can we build on that? And I think we've seen that most recently in the Holiday Inn outbreak and the Black Rock outbreak, that we, manage those outbreaks through contact tracing, testing, the pathology system, our community engagement. There's been challenges, but we've built on it, and our teams work, Viv and my team work very closely together now. I'm also hopeful, it's a really interesting point that Viv raised. I'm really hopeful that we will be able to build on what we've experienced over the past 12 months and make sure that we do leave a lasting change in the likes of the Department of Health. It's something my team absolutely talks about at the moment. To your point, Virginia, COVID's not over yet. The COVID public health response team is still there. But what aspects can we make sure that we don't lose after that, final quarter is played? And I'm not sure I love that analogy as a Geelong Cats fan, because the grand final last year is still raw.
Yeah,
but,
I can't help you with that.
Yeah.
So can I just say that I do share Kate's view, because the collaboration was just enormous.
Yeah.
It has been enormous, and you could see.
Well, it had to be.
Yes. Well, it had to be, but there was just the absolute willingness, and the commitment was there, and I think that's also something that really helped expedite the changes that it needed to.
From the point of view of coming in at July, and as you said, just as we were starting to lose the war with the second wave, I think, what were the daily infection figures when you arrived? Were we about 600?
I think it was about 2 to 3 weeks after I joined, we got up to that 720 mark.
Right.
So I probably joined somewhere around the 200. I don't quite remember.
And then we all remember those terrible days. But But to be part of a team, within a team that's experiencing that and realising, oh hell, we actually don't have the public health workforce that we need. Oh, we don't actually have, the test, trace and isolate scheme in place that we need right now. What was that like for you and for individuals working with you? What was it like being in that place day after day?
Well, I think it was especially challenging joining, because I think, the best of us at any time have an imposter syndrome. And here I was coming out of transport, and I brought, some colleagues came with me. And at that time, the public service really did respond to bring people from anywhere with the right capabilities and skills to try and boost the response. But there were, people in the Department of Health had been working tirelessly to try and, stamp on that second wave. And so we came into an environment where people were tired. There was an absolute passion and willingness in the culture, but again, you just needed to boost it with extra people who hadn't had to live through the past 3 or 4 months. And there's still obviously a hell of a lot of really passionate and capable people who've been on the response since March last year. I was talking to a colleague yesterday.
That's right.
She said she's up to week 50. So there are people who've been with it since day one. And because it is a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour response, like, a bushfire, thankfully, only lasts a month or two. And we're very used to that as Victorians and Australians, of course. But there's been a cycling of people through the response, and joining it too, you just needed to jump in and see what difference you could make, what skills you could bring, and honestly how you could best support your colleagues. And I think, the approach has been, you've got to use humour, but we've also been really, really honest with each other, because you just need to trust each other in that environment, and bring a vulnerability and a courage to work that, quite frankly, I've not seen before. You've seen pockets of it in your career, but I think this has been a whole new level.
A number of issues I'd love to come back and visit over the period of our conversation, so I hope we will. But we're still, I guess, in our conversation and taking you back to last year, in the early stages of what you're trying to do in your organisation and with your respective communities. I just wanted you to reflect on whether there was one thing in those early days, one issue that you identified as really crucial, really important, that you had to nail and get right. And did that stay the case the whole way through? Did that change? Did that one thing actually reveal itself to be not the critical thing that you and your organisation needed to nail? Did it become something else? Nicole, can I get you to start on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me it was to look for and hear solutions from not the usual places. So it was very much about hearing from the staff who were on the ground, hearing about the issues that they were experiencing and asking them for the solution, and having sort of that trust and courage and going with it. In many ways it was also about listening to the consumers or the clients that we work with, understanding what the issues were for them and then partnering with them to develop the solutions. So it was that constant connection, the listening to people delivering different ideas and solutions and innovating, which I think stayed true the whole way through.
And did that zig and zag? You'd go in one direction, but then, as the pandemic progressed, you'd have to zag to another.
Absolutely. And I think, like Kate was saying, that you learned and you relearn and you retest and you redo it, and over time you get better. Your systems and your processes improve and you get better. We can run a testing site now and have people tested in through in six minutes per test. So, but back on day one, when the queue was around the block and we were still working through.
How many minutes was that test back then?
Yeah, that's right, quite a few minutes. So you learn and you get better. So, and it does zigzag. It goes up and down, and you try things and it doesn't work, and you try it a different way and it works. So you're continually innovating, working through issues.
Is there a particular experience that you went through that speaks to that question?
There's probably a couple, and I mentioned them very early on, but the innovation that I saw with Aboriginal organisations being innovative in relation to how they deliver services. The unique situation that we're in is that we know our communities. We know our communities intimately. We know where auntie lives and where uncle lives, so we could deliver services directly to their doors. A little place up in Halls Gap, Budja Budja, who is a member of VACCHO, what they did, because it's a small community, they actually took COVID testing to the house because there was no public transport up there and not a lot of blackfellas have cars. So they were innovative, and I mentioned the Meals on Wheels, gourmet Meals on Wheels I might add. The innovation there and the calling up auntie and uncle. The one that tested me most of all was when Black Lives Matter happened from around the world. And I thought to myself, from a public health point of view, from a world pandemic point of view, how is VACCHO going to deal with this? How are we? Because there was pressure from government for me to come out and say, everyone please stay home. Well, I couldn't do that. But how did we mobilise our services to ensure that the people who turned up to that rally here in Melbourne had access to PPE? We had all this hand sanitiser donated from Western Australia, by the way. So we provided all the masks and hand sanitiser for that Black Lives Matter protest. And it was a challenge. And
were you conflicted about it?
I was conflicted about it, but I deeply, deeply supported the fact that people felt, because of what happened in America, that we have to make a stand. Pandemic or no pandemic, this can't continue, where Aboriginal people are dying by law, at the hands of law, right across the world, not just in Australia. But the American incident highlighted that right across the globe, and I was conflicted. I didn't go, not because I didn't want to go, because I was babysitting grannies, so the younger generation could go. But I was very, I was very proud that the organisers and the people that turned up did wear masks, and they did use the sanitiser because they came and got them from VACCHO. It was really hard to keep the COVID safe distance in such, and there was not a lot of, there was not a lot of issues on the day. Yeah. It was a very peaceful.
It was such a divisive moment, that one. I mean, we all remember the media discussion and the public discussion around that. In the end, government, we've been through that year, where does everyone fall about whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do in the middle of a pandemic? Do you want to say?
I think there's a strict public health answer, but at the same time, we're a democracy. So I think, people should be able to respond to issues that matter to them. And people do, for the most part, respect the public health advice that's given by, Brett and the Department of Health and wearing of masks and respectful of behaviours and sanitisation. Yeah. So people still did what they could while needing the
but
need to have
the shocking
say.
part about that, what shocked me about that was the aftermath in relation to everyone in media and politicians pointing out, not Victorian politicians, I don't think, it was mainly at the federal level, pointing out that the second wave that we had here in Victoria was due to Black Lives Matter. That was utterly a lie and not true.
That's very true. It was not. It was not because of Black Lives Matter at all. Yeah. We've got the health person in the room. I'm trying to remember now how many infections there were out of that particular, and I think there were 3 or 4. Do you remember?
Singular, if any. My
think
memory.
There's one.
Yeah. I think my memory says about 3, but apologies if I'm getting that figure wrong. But and certainly no spread from it. No. But It was one of those, that was a key, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jill, because that's a key kind of early moment in the pandemic when, as a society, we're struggling to balance all of those, all of those pressures and conflicts. And you had, freedom marches come later on in the pandemic as well in response to the lockdowns and community division over those as well.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. I keep coming back to Vivian and the contrast that I hear, Jill, in your experience and how different your particular, original truth and what you had to cling to and whether that changed, how different that must have been for you compared to Jill's experience.
Well, I think the point that really I took a lot of inspiration from is that the community's response was just really amazing. They didn't wait for policies to be in place. They just
they did not. You should talk about that. Talk about that in relation to masks.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
They knew, like Auntie Jill said, they knew where some of their community members are. They know where the students live, and they just deliver the supports until the task force, the cold task force, came into effect in August. And that's what I draw inspiration from, that they take pride in this state, in this country. They are very proud to be Australian, and they play their part. And it just comes out so much in social media. And for me, that's ongoing all the way throughout the year. But the moment for me was actually being on the ground in Flemington when the lockdown was announced.
Talk to us about that. What was your experience of that like?
Well, I was down with Andrew Crisp down in North Melbourne first. And so we went out and we had a look on
From emergency management,
That's right, on the Sunday afternoon. And he took me into one of those incident or emergency IMT, incident management team meeting. And I heard this loud megaphone that was coming down from the building and so on and so on. I thought, oh. So I talked to the lady there and she said, yeah. And I mean, she didn't know who I was and all of these things. So, and then I went down and then back to Flemington again with Andrew Chris, and I saw so many Victoria Police men and women there, and just the various community leaders standing around. Some of them were delivering medical supplies for various members as liaison officers. And I just couldn't really quite see how this was going to work. And what drew me was, I guess for me, coming here as a refugee, you value those freedoms. And so you really wanted the community to be served and to be served right, because they kind of did it for the state, right? So they did it for the team. So how can we make sure that whatever it was that they need, be it very basic stuff like food or halal food or being able to access their local Catholic parish priest or people like that. So that was what really. So I was there every night, just going through it, literally everything. I put my hand up. I've never actually done that. They were in this massive IMT meeting in Flemington, and I was like, the controller went around the room and said, okay, all of the issues that I met, that was where I met co-health, Chris. And then he asked, well, is there any other issue anyone wants to say? And then I put my hand up and said, is it me? And then, oh, so who are you? What is wrong? Oh, that's me. All right, so you got a table. So he immediately said, you've got a table. And then we quickly organised us and we had a table. And then we took out this butcher paper and said, Victorian Multicultural Commission, and we sat there. And we took part in the IMT meetings.
I want to speak to Nicole about this as well, because I know that CoHealth had a big presence at the towers as well. But what's your reflection on that? Was it well handled? Was the lockdown necessary?
I can't comment on whether or not the lockdown was necessary, but what I can say was the first couple of days was rough. There was very little coordination and understanding of who was doing what on the ground. But by the time, and this is what I'm truly grateful that Minister Wynne and the Department of Housing, Ben Rimmer, they set up this working group. And I know some community members didn't like that because suddenly only a certain number of people were part of the working group. No. But we needed a structure. Because when I held the first community forum on that Saturday night, the 4th, and I remember it well because it's the 4th of July, right, for many of us who were involved in the Vietnam War, there was hundreds of people on the call, and we were just screaming and yelling at each other. And it was very difficult for Aguirre and I to co-chair that particular night, right on the 4th. So there was a bit of a structure in place, and I get criticised too afterwards for, well, you excluded this voice and that other voice. But right at the very time, there was no textbook, there was no guidebook that would help us. We needed some sort of a structure. And I'm very glad that that structure did work, and it really helped. The working group became the clearinghouse for the issue that came from this person, that household, laptops for the schools. Anything and everything under the sun, the departments delivered, and that's something I felt really, really appreciative of. Whether it be a family with a laptop on that, with that very address, in that very building in Flemington, the next day they got their stuff delivered, whatever it was. And that sense of collaboration, as much as I was frustrated at the outset, it was just really overwhelming, positively overwhelming.
Kate, I want to come back to you about the health department response to that situation, to that very important moment in our year last year. But Nicole, tell us about how CoHealth was involved and how you managed it and whether you feel you managed it well.
Yeah, it was one of those true leadership challenges. It wasn't a difficult decision for me that we needed to be there. That was the easy part. It was the what is our response, how deep, for how long, that was the challenge.
What were you doing there?
We provided medical services and social care to the 9 towers, so across both Flemington and North Melbourne. We set up 2 primary care clinics, and I think in that first week I had 140 CoHealth staff on the ground supporting 3,000 residents. We set up a 24-hour call centre back at one of the CoHealth clinics that was manned, 24 hours a day, taking calls from residents around health concerns. We had a whole team of medical staff in the background doing telehealth support, and then GPs at both estates providing medical care to people in their homes who had contracted COVID. And that was confronting. But out of that came, feedback from residents saying, "Thank you, CoHealth. Thanks for being here. I can see you from the window. It's great to see my nurse here or my doctor or someone that I recognise." And that's really what kept us going, providing that support to those 3,000 residents. About a third of those residents were already known to CoHealth. They used the local clinic. So it was great that we already had that relationship, but we were sending text messages in language to 3,000 residents. Wow. We were delivering food, we were delivering medication, we were delivering baby formula, we were de-escalating incidents. It wasn't just the medical care. We were working closely with Royal Melbourne Hospital, testing residents, providing other medical care that wasn't COVID related. It was extraordinary.
It's an incredible amount of work that you described there. The wider social criticism of the lockdown and the real backlash that it received was largely about whether CALD communities were being treated differently to other communities, where other people were allowed to isolate at home and trusted to isolate at home without there being, phalanxes of police officers out the front. And Vivian, you raised the point about how those CALD communities, many of them would have a particular response to their freedoms being taken away. What's your reflection on that now? Was it an overkill in terms of a law and order response?
It was very heavy, law and order, and on reflection, I think it should have been treated as a health response, and so quite a different response in that way. What we learned from Flemington and North Melbourne, which we then rolled out across 27 other high-rise towers and developed right across the West, was a program that would support people who tested positive to COVID-19. So we supported 1,500 people right across the West, linking them into the right care at the right place at the right time, whether that needed to be a hospital admission or GP care. Of those 1,500 people that we provided services to, 63% needed the social supports to be able to isolate safely and well at home. And that could have been assistance with purchasing food. It could have been, case management, people that were experiencing family violence. A lot of international students, an international student who was living in a share house and his share mates had asked him to leave, so he was homeless. There was many, many stories, heartbreaking really, but what we really found was that people needed that social support to be able to isolate and stay home. We couldn't just assume that people had the means to be able to do that. And I think that was what was very different between the first and second wave. You know, the first wave we really saw as a result of international travel. And by and large, people who are travelling internationally have a home and have the means to be able to isolate for 14 days and order in what they need. The second wave was very different. It impacted the most vulnerable people in our community, and they didn't have those resources to be able to isolate safely.
Kate, what are the lessons learnt, do you think, out of the tower lockdowns?
I think we made a lot of changes as a result of what we saw on the ground. We certainly made real efforts to partner more closely with our community health and other organisations. They're not part of the Department of Health, but they're absolutely our partners. And I think, for instance, our rapid response testing teams that Nicole and the team are involved in, as well as other community health organisations, are a really good example of that. So we set up, supports to be able to test at home, Call to Test being a great example as well for other members of our community who weren't able to access our fixed testing sites. We established a bicultural workers program so that people could access and understand testing in more of a culturally acceptable way, so that they could, engage with members of their community and our, Viv mentioned before, structure. One thing that I think our team is really proud of in terms of our outbreak management response was the coordination and structure that we brought, possibly out of a sort of transport type background. We're used to incidents on a transport network, and it's fascinating to see how we're able to bring that to a health setting and have the right people in the room, and to ensure that we were giving the right supports to the people who needed it. So we had members, local faith leaders perhaps, or, the local governments, the community health providers who knew these communities best, because of course sitting up at Lonsdale Street, you don't necessarily know the communities best. So we did put those structures and rhythms in place, and I think that the first we did that in Colac. We reiterated and rebuilt on it for the likes of Shepparton. We've done it for other outbreaks since, and I think it's paying dividends.
Yeah, it's interesting taking that zoom back, and you can, as you mentioned there, Colac, then Shepparton, and then of course we get to the end of the year and the better management of those outbreaks. We're building the history of last year and the experience, and it all seems so simple and easily achieved now. It was utterly painful at the time. But Kate, what was it like? Because at that time, of course, the department was under sustained criticism for what it wasn't doing, and we talked earlier about how there wasn't a public health response at the beginning of this that perhaps there should have been, and of course the government's learned hard lessons out of that. But what was it like having that constant comparison with New South Wales? That New South Wales had a better public health system, that had recruited actively and consistently into its public health system, that it was managing its test, trace and isolate better. What was that like as a public servant and as a group of workers hearing that and comparing yourselves to it?
It's a really good question, and it's a really difficult environment to be in when the media is constantly commenting on your efforts and your work every single day. And I've had some colleagues be really affected by it because I think sometimes the media tends to forget that we're a bunch of public servants trying to serve our public. That's what we do. That's why we're here. I think whether we've all been long-term public servants or whether we found it after private industry the way I did, I think the reason people join the public service or stay in it is because they really love that feeling of giving back and doing something super important. That could be in housing, it could be in transport, or it could be in a pandemic like we have been. So I think there are comparisons to other jurisdictions, to New South Wales and so on, but certainly what I tried to do and what most of my teams tried to do, you try and block it out. I don't know whether you guys know Brene Brown and some of the words she preaches, but something she used to say, and still says, I'm sure, is that, I'll take criticism from people who are in the arena with me. And I think that's been, that for my health colleagues, that's been something they've tried to live by, to say, do you know what, we're just going to do the best we can. And everyone has always wanted to improve, not to be better than New South Wales or to be better than anyone else, but to make sure that, you know,
Or even as good as.
Or even as good as. I'm not getting into gold standard conversations. But I think that's just been the guiding light for my colleagues, a passionate response, working tirelessly and doing the best you can to try and serve Victorians.
So we'll move on to something else. Did you feel and do you feel in that department, and I think this is always a really important question for any public servant, do you feel through your lines of management that you have that you're able to speak truth to government?
Yes.
And is there pushback against what's being passed up the line from your department?
It's been a really interesting experience. Obviously, having served various ministers, various governments in the past, I've found the government's response to this to be amazing. They are taking the Department of Health as the public health experts, and they want the advice. So we give that frank and fearless advice. Government will obviously, you know, make their own decisions. But yes, I have absolutely found that this government has listened to us.
Vivian, I wanted to come back to something you were saying, and it struck me when you mentioned the date of August was when the CULD committee was finally formed. Is that right?
The Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Communities Task Force.
Task Force, yes, not committee, task force, yes. And a part of you goes, crikey, August, you know, that was terribly late. It took an awfully long time. What it sparked in me was just a very strong memory of there were a number of people, you know, and I was on air as a public servant like you every damn day through this pandemic. A number of medical people that I spoke to often and relied on for their sort of wise counsel who come from Southeast Asian backgrounds and, mostly Southeast Asian and countries around there, constantly pointing out to me that our health response was so Eurocentric, that it didn't actually regard as peer countries, Taiwan, Singapore and the like, that we always look to America and the US and the UK for our response. And then when I look at South Asian American, Australian communities here, they had such a different response to the pandemic. They knew, they had lived experience of, you know, SARS and MERS and H1N1, and they had, you were mentioning before how quick they were to respond. Did that strike you as a real contrast and perhaps something that we missed in our response, that we should have had that look further to the southeast of our neighbours?
I don't have light or sight of what the Chief Health Officer does in terms of the comparisons that he and his team does. But what I do know is that many of the Southeast Asian communities were very big on masks right at the outset.
Yes, they were.
They were wearing masks and they were writing to the Chief Health Officer saying, make masks compulsory.
Yes, they were.
And they said to us through the consultations, the meetings that we had, so that the departments could hear directly from the communities. They were always saying those things, that they've had that experience. We need to do that. We need to engage the community sooner, and we need to engage them deeply. So we couldn't just have one representative doing a film clip on behalf of, say, in my case, the Vietnamese community. You need more than that. Yeah. And so there's some of the things that I think that they learn from their own lived experience. And some of them even wanted harder rules in terms of isolation. They actually wanted to be checked in on every day to make sure that the person actually complies. And I'm like, hang on, this is a free country. Right? You can't do that.
We don't lock the doors here.
That's right, you can't. They have every right to do what they need to do. Right? So there are some of those elements, because obviously in some of the countries, the rules, I guess the political system is slightly different to that
much
of
more
ours.
strict.
That's right.
But they were early adopters of social distancing. I remember really clearly in the early days, you know, those public spaces and commercial shopping areas where we have, you know, a high number of, you know, Southeast Asian Australians or Australians of Southeast Asian origin there. They distanced, they went home. They didn't, you know, congregate anymore. I mean, they were so onto it. There's a wisdom there that I feel we missed out on capitalising on.
It is also, I guess, the flip side of it now is that they're not too afraid to come out. So now, as we are starting to, you know, we really need to encourage, especially the older people, and now we're talking about vaccine and things of that nature. They are really, really keen to know the facts. And they're really keen to understand what they are so that they can safely receive the vaccine and come back out and so be social again. So there's that, but there's also that other thing that now I am a little bit worried about, the social isolation. that some of the older members of the community experience.
Well, let's talk about that for your communities and for the groups that you're serving. The psychological effects of this pandemic are yet to be completely understood and really to be dealt with thoroughly. And the isolation, the loneliness, which is a problem we're all suffering from as a society anyway, compounded only by this. Jill, can I start with you? What are the real problems there for your communities?
It was a problem and it still is. Aboriginal communities in Victoria are already overrepresented in the mental health system. So the isolation, the loneliness exacerbated the mental health and the transgenerational trauma that already existed. We didn't see an increase in suicides, but for the general public, suicides went down. But for our mob, it stayed at the same level. So it didn't go down. So we had quite a few suicides. And what was different about it was there was clusters. And that was pretty disheartening. So even today, with the release of the mental health report,
Royal Commission,
the Royal Commission report, and how to talk about it's not just at the crisis end. The mental health system has to look at a broad spectrum, which I think is really good. So isolation and mental health exacerbation within our communities is very real, and it's a humongous problem. And when we were in stage 4 lockdown, we tried to think of ways how we can engage with the community virtually. Now, we had problems with that, let alone elders wouldn't even know what an iPad was. I mean, my mum called it Wi-Fi, not Wi-Fi. What's Wi-Fi? So, so we had those...
Not just Indigenous nanas saying that, okay. All nanas, sorry, not all, some nanas.
And a lot of our people didn't have access to internet.
Of course.
To stay connected. That was a humongous problem because of the level of poverty that still exists in our communities.
That digital divide was really, boy, did we... It was like, the pandemic was like shining a light through the bottom of a cracked vase. You know, if you wanted to find where the cracks were in terms of either, inequity or, social dislocation or, insecure work, there were the cracks all the way through.
Yes. Yeah.
Nicole?
Absolutely. I think, as you were saying, that the pandemic really exposed those cracks, and for our health team that works in Melbourne CBD, works very closely with people who experience homelessness. And, that period for people experiencing homelessness were able to be housed in hotels, but, the streets of Melbourne are their home, and for those streets to be absolutely deserted was really confronting for that community. We purchased as many iPads and mobile phones as we could to provide to people who are homeless so that we could keep connected to them, so that they could keep connected to the rest of the world. It was those types of initiatives that were absolutely critical during that time.
All of our wonderful viewers and streamers this afternoon are reminding me in their terrific questions, which I'm about to come to, that of course this is our International Women's Day Forum, and so many of the questions go to those issues, and I'm dying to hear your views on that. I feel like we've largely addressed the issue of how you manage to work with and across and in collaboration with other organisations, other parts of the public service, other not-for-profits and the like. We've sort of largely covered that, but would anyone like to say anything more about that, about collaboration, what worked and what didn't? Kate, do you have anything there?
I just hope we continue to work the way we've started to work. I think the collaboration, and I was again talking to a colleague of mine, she comes out of a health service, used to be, a chief operating officer of a hospital, and she says that it was, not sort of, the Department of Health perhaps was not that fondly thought of in some health services because the level of clinical expertise perhaps not as high as some of those health services thought thought it could be.
Right.
But she's also remarked on how her experience has been and how much she's loved it. And I just hope we're able to build on all that and continue the partnerships. You know, the work where the Called Communities Task Force, we've got a Called Health Advisory Panel now, and we're starting to explore how can we ensure the Department of Health continues to build on this, because, you know, Jill touched on the mental health impacts of the pandemic, but there's huge physical impacts as well. I mean, ED presentations are up. You know, there's been undiagnosed illnesses because people didn't want to come to the health system last year. And I don't even think we know what the tip of that iceberg looks like.
No, that wave
yet.
hasn't really started yet, has it? Yeah.
So I think as long as we can build on everything we've got, continue our partnerships, we should hopefully be able to get those, you know, health messages and preventative health behaviours and so on through every community, because we do also talk about called communities, but there are other communities that don't engage with the health system that much either, be it youth or be it, you know, perhaps socioeconomic communities that may not have as much as Jill and Nicole addressed before.
Vivian, do you want to add anything there?
I absolutely think collaboration has to be the way to go, and especially for the multicultural communities. And I also think that engaging and listening to them, because they do know their communities better than us. And sometimes, as difficult the message or the conversation as it may be, we have to be able to be willing to listen and take on board their suggestions, because I think that's how we can support the broader public health directions.
I've got a question here that goes right to the heart of the big issue that's been dominating the public discussion for the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to rephrase it slightly. And I know I don't need to remind this panel of the care that we need to take around the issues of defamation, and also that we, of course, presume anyone to be innocent until our courts find them otherwise. But this question is one that we've been asking ourselves as women and as men all around Australia for 2 weeks now. How do we maintain our energy towards equality when misogyny as serious as alleged sexual assault reaches to the highest levels of government? I guess we could probably say, why would we assume that it doesn't reach into every part of society when clearly the figures show that it does? But who would like to respond there? Jill, would you like to start?
Thank you, Virginia. Look, I don't have too much to say about what's happening currently in the past couple of weeks. I mean, I've always been a very strong woman, Aboriginal woman. I come from a very strong line of Aboriginal women. We are a culture, my clan, we follow the matriarch. So I've never personally experienced that sort of behaviour. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in the Aboriginal community, but it's very rare do you see it. We've got, in the Aboriginal community in Victoria, when you look at the majority of leaders in the Victorian Aboriginal community, they're all Aboriginal women.
And that makes a difference?
I think so, yes, I think so. I'm not trying to put down our men, because they play an equally vital role. In traditional Aboriginal societies, men and women were equal. We just had different roles in a traditional society.
Nicole?
Look, I think we, need to take a lead from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think, who was it that said before that it's going to take us 200 years to achieve equality? I think it's, right around the globe, it's an issue. It continues to be an issue, and we need to continue to voice it as an issue to achieve that equality.
The question goes to energy being maintained. Yeah. And I guess it's implying that reading what we do, and not just in federal parliament, that's where it's been most galvanising for the last couple of weeks in terms of allegations, but everywhere. And all the stories that we hear from women that we know, and women who, we know and that they know, and, twice removed and 3 times removed. That's what's energy sapping about this, and that's what leaves you feeling exhausted and just unable to keep the fight up. Kate, what's your response to that question?
I don't think we have a choice. And I think we need to rely on our male colleagues and friends and partners and loved ones to help us, because they're going to be the way we can create this change. I'm I'm really, really happy Jill's never experienced anything of this type. And whilst, I'm not talking about the same sort of stories necessarily as been in the media over the last 2 weeks, but, I've experienced things I shouldn't have. Most of the women I know have experienced things they shouldn't have. And I try to share those stories with the people that I trust and the men that I trust, because if we stop sharing those stories, it may not be all men, but there's enough men to affect almost all women. And so we need their help, in my view, to help create that change. And sharing our stories is the best way, I think, that we can do that.
Vivienne?
Well, I think it's tragic that we have to continue to hear this for such a long time, especially in Australia, a country that is considered extremely free and open, and many of us from overseas want to come here, and and are so happy to be accepted here into this country. I think it's tragic that we still have to hear that, and especially in the place that people like me consider as the symbol of freedom. So I personally think it's quite tragic. I think, though, we have to be leaders like us need to be able to somehow create that platform for women to be able to say those stories, share those stories in a way that they can receive the support and be able to push through some of those systemic change. And that's the thing that I think, it's difficult, it's tragic, it's energy zapping. But I think for people in leadership positions, it's hard, but I think we feel that there is that extra responsibility upon us to be able to try our best, or even better best, to really create that a safe and open platform for women to be able to bring that out, and for us to be able to take the next step to sort it out.
Australian of the Year Grace Tame uses the phrase of starting a conversation and just to wanting to keep that conversation going. It was very interesting to me that one of my listeners this morning texted in and said, it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's painful and uncomfortable to keep talking about this and to hear this. But she said, I think the only way we'll get there is to actually get comfortable with sitting in that agony and sitting in that difficulty. You have to actually stay in it. And stay in it until you hear the stories, until you understand it, as the only way of getting through it and getting to that next place that you described, Vivienne. So along the same lines, there's a question here from Jackie, I think it is. What are the panel's thoughts on quotas to achieve gender equity, including access to pay and seats on boards and recognition targets in Australian honours, for example? Quotas?
I'm a big fan of targets. Sorry, but you have to jump in there.
That's
I've
fine.
been saying that ever since I've been appointed into this role. We have push and pull strategy in marketing terms. I can't work out why we can't have targets. We have targets for sales, we have targets for revenue, we have targets for all sorts of things. Why can't we have targets for gender? And it's not a tokenistic thing. If you as a leader appoint a female who doesn't do the job well and hasn't been supported to do her job well, it's not a reflection on her, it is a reflection on you as a leader for having appointed her into that position and not supporting her to be successful. You've got to set people up for success. I'm a big fan of targets.
I absolutely agree, Vivienne, and I think, it's that old saying about, what gets measured matters.
Gets done.
And so, setting targets draws people's attention. It suddenly matters. So I absolutely agree.
Kate?
I'm not a fan of the word equality. I quite like the word equity when it comes to these matters, because we're starting from behind. I don't know how far behind. Maybe we've caught up a little bit over the last 10 or 20 years, but we're still behind. So, I'm 5'1". I'm short. Virginia, I think you're a bit taller than me, and especially in those heels. So if I can't see something, should you or should I have equal time standing on that table? Equality suggests we both spend 10 minutes standing on that table to see over the fence, but I'm shorter than you. So equity is you giving me the table. And I think we need to recognise that and change our language. And I'm not quite answering the quota question, but I think quotas might help.
I'm more than happy to buy any of my sisters a good pair of heels any day. I tell you, they work. They really, really do. Jill?
I'm very supportive of targets. I mean, Aboriginal people have been fighting for 250 years for equity. So we're starting way down on a low base. So to have targets of having Aboriginal people in seats of parliament, having targets of Aboriginal people or women on boards, having targets of Aboriginal people recruited into the public service. Otherwise it'll never happen.
What happened to treaty negotiations during the pandemic? Were they continued in some way?
They continued in a big way.
Okay.
It was all done virtually, of course.
Of course.
I think the state government are now at a stage where I don't think it's been publicly announced yet, so we'll just keep it between us.
Just tell us.
We will just keep it between us.
Of course we will.
But I think the first thing that the First People's Assembly, working in collaboration with government, will be announcing a truth and healing process for Victoria.
Oh, excellent.
And then in conjunction with that, they're still working on a treaty negotiating framework which allows individual clans and groups to negotiate their own individual treaties.
Wow. It's going to be an exciting time.
I think so.
Yeah, wow. Great question here on leadership. What would you say, says Anonymous, oh, come on, give us your name. What would you say are the most important attributes of successful leaders today? And I'll reframe that slightly. Given what you've learnt about yourself and about others around you last year, has your answer to that changed perhaps in the last 12 months? Vivian?
No, I think for me, that sense of purpose, what I am doing and why I am doing something, is always the key anchor for me. It's not, it doesn't matter what it is. If I believe in what I do and why I do it, that's really what drives me. And that's what's been the point that has been driving me in this role. We are a statutory body. We have to work with government, and we get criticised by communities too for sometimes being too close to government or not listening enough to the communities or not having enough inclusive forums and things of that nature. But I do believe that for things to move, we have to collaborate. I don't know pointing out somebody that you are wrong, you're incompetent, you're whatever, is going to help me. So I think collaboration has to be the way, and that if I can try my best to convince the person that we have a common purpose, then I think we'll make progress.
Kate?
I still believe in a lot of my leadership sort of tenets around, courage and vulnerability and leading by example and all those things. But I think I've probably added a couple in the past year. One is being kind to myself. Because I think it's been really easy to work harder and harder and listen to the media and listen to the comparisons and Viv to beat me up and then Nicole to beat me up. But, where we respond in the right way.
Forget me, I'm here to beat you up too.
Yeah, well, you're the media, Virginia, so, that's best left unsaid. So we need to be kind to ourselves as leaders, and I think sometimes we forget that, but we wouldn't treat others the way we're sometimes treating ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think we've got to come back to that. And the second thing is how important my social, family and friend networks are in me being a successful leader. And I don't think I realised that until last year, because there'd be days where I was down and I don't talk to my family and friends anymore. I could be dead according to them, I think. But they send me a text and just say, thinking of you. Can't wait to see you again.
Are you still with us?
Are you still with us? Because I think, anyone who's played a role like we have on the COVID response, and for be it 50 weeks or be it 5 weeks, you need that support from your friends and your family, because it is relentless and it helps you resilience. So that's the other thing that I don't think I quite realised helped me be successful until last year.
Great observations, Kate. Nicole?
Yeah, not too dissimilar really. So I think the piece for me, and it hasn't changed, but is leading with kindness and empathy and compassion, and definitely having that purpose. But picking up on Kate's point really is about the fantastic female leaders that I have around me, whether they're, in the professional sense, in the work environment, or, my girlfriends that have just, supported me, given me that energy and that motivation, I just think has been so critical over the past 12 months.
Jill?
Apart from empathy and compassion, I think stubbornness is really, really important. And what? Nothing. Just being, what's the word? The only word I can think of.
Resilience.
Resilience, just being stubborn.
Ornery.
I reckon my boss would want a word about that, my stubbornness.
Being stubborn and really believing what you do or say is what, you believe in it.
Back yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. I have to say, I can't tell you how much I've missed doing this. I've been locked away for the last 12 months as well, going to a studio, talking to a microphone, no one there, and being surrounded by some incredibly thoughtful, intelligent and devoted and hardworking women is just incredibly inspiring to me. So it's been wonderful being able to talk to you all today. Please give a huge round of applause, wherever you are, to our terrific panel, please. Nicole and Jill and Vivian and Kate. And with that, I'll pass back to Ensar for some final words.
Hi, everyone. This brings us to the end of this evening's event. I've heard some incredible stories shared tonight, and I can't tell you how grateful I am that COVID response, that our lives, that our health and well-being, that our security is in the hands of such capable, competent leaders, women leaders, and that we're here celebrating them today. Thank you, Kate, for sharing with us how hard the journey has been, how stubborn you are, and Jill, how stubborn you are as well. I like ornery, Virginia. Thank you, Viv and Nicole. I have family in more than one of the towers, and they remarked on more than one occasion how meaningful and how life-changing the response from the VMC, CoHealth, and other community and not-for-profit organizations was for them. It gave them hope. And I think ultimately what I heard was when we have women leaders, we have people whose innate abilities are amplified, their abilities to adapt, to collaborate, to enhance, to make lasting improvements, to connect people, to form partnerships, and to innovate. So all of the things, particularly including being willing to risk being criticized to do the right thing, that we want to see in our leaders every day. Thank you to Virginia. Incredible facilitation and hosting, as always. Thank you, Nicole, Jill, Kate, and Vivian, and the audience for the questions. I have to finish off with a quick reminder about some upcoming IPAA events. The People Leaders Wellbeing Leadership Series commences again at the end of March. So please sign up for that if you haven't already, or recommend it to people leaders who want support, want tips and advice around managing well-being for their people. IPAA's partnered with the Australian Institute of Company Directors to bring you Foundations of Directorship for the Public Sector. That will be held in May. However, you need to book by Friday, 2nd of April, to ensure that you can book a spot. And finally, integrity is a core tenet of the public purpose sector and underpins the community's trust in the services we deliver. The IPAA Senior Executive Integrity and Ethical Leadership Program is open now for expressions of interest. Details about all of these programs and many more can be found on our website, www.vic.ipaa.org.au. And a final reminder about our special personal membership offer tonight. So 50 memberships available for $50. Visit our website to join or call our membership department in the morning. IPAA Victoria is deeply committed to cultivating women leaders, providing access to career development programs, confidence-building programs, networking opportunities, and facilitating connection with role models. We're all acutely aware of the toll that COVID-19 has taken on us personally and as a community, as a country and globally. The women on the panel tonight have all demonstrated the qualities of leadership, and they lead their organizations and communities with empathy and courage. But it's not just the women on the panel who have made a difference. So many women across Victoria have actively promoted gender equality, or equity, actually, Kate. I'm in voracious agreement with you about that. have actively promoted gender equality by challenging stereotypes, broadening perceptions, and improving situations for individuals and communities across the state. This is a critical time for analysis and reflection, but let's also make room for celebration, to acknowledge not just the work of these women, but of all of us, how we've persevered or innovated or connected, and that the community has been all the better for it. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'll be sure to let Nia know that the women that I met tonight and heard from and their capable leadership isn't done for tons of cash, but in service of community. And we hope to see you all at an IPAA Victoria event again soon. Thank you.